Hello, everybody. What's up? What's up? Welcome back. Let me move that for a little bit. Welcome back to part two of the deepest lore through ever. I'm gonna start calling it DLE, just so everybody knows. I realized last time that my mic absolutely sucked, so I'm gonna try and sit a little closer to it. Um, Today, as you can tell by the thumbnail, wanted to talk about the intro cinematic and everything that we're seeing there because there's a ton of information that happens in a very short period of time. Um, but before I do that, I wanted to quickly, for those of you that watched the Elden Lord video, um, in there I talk about the different stages of development that people go through. There's four different stages. It's broken up basically into the first half is all about ego development, and it's about basically from when you're born until you're 30 or so, and then the second half is all about uh, the process of individuation, and it starts when you're about mid age, somewhere in 40 years old or so. Um, and one thing that was really interesting is that um, pull this up is that when you go into the character creation screen, um, and you go to basically where you want to be from, your origins, um, or who the quote unquote like species of people that you are, um, they all look pretty similar until you get to Newman. Um, so like if we go to Nightfolk, the age it stays young, right? But once we go to Newman, it goes to aged. Um, I really like how Negredo is the first step of uh, alchemical pursuit. In Fair Missoula, the primordial land is depicted by the theme of death, Godwin's curse. Yeah, yeah. Stick around, dude. I think you're gonna like this one. Um, but it's interesting that when you pick, no matter what your origin is, when you pick the Newman race, um, it automatically puts you into an aged category, um, which I thought was really interesting because the process of individuation, aka which is the process of the magnum opus, but from a psychological standpoint, it happens when you are middle aged, like kind of when you're starting to come to that state of maturity when you're 40 or so. And I just thought it's really really cool that they, for whatever reason, they chose to make Newman, like the stock Newman race, be aged. Um, is I thought fit really neatly. Um, but before we get into Negredo, I wanted to just, since we are entering the game in, um, let me get back here. Since we're entering the game in the basically the third stage of life, the beginning of the second half, I just wanted to read it really quickly and just kind of get your guys' thoughts and see what you think. So the second half of life, midlife, happens around 35 to 40 years old. Metaphorically, as the clock strikes noon, the descent begins. The morals, ideas, and convictions that people value will need to be evaluated, but this can be difficult for stubborn folks. Young said it's not a good idea to adhere to old convictions as one empties the cup, another metaphor he used. Using the sunrise sunset model, there are ideals that are healthy to pursue in the morning, but not at all worth pursuing in the afternoon. The time is nigh to loosen the grip and open oneself up to activities that involve more humanistic objectives like the stewards of culture heritage and caring for the future generations. So that's just kind of the overall kind of what the second half is about. But middle age is where the third stage begins, and it says the process of individuation commences here. This is the process by which a person becomes a psychological individual, a separate, indivisible unity or whole, recognizing their innermost uniqueness, and is identified this process with becoming one's own self or self-realization, which he distinguished from the ego-centeredness and individualism. In other words, the ego takes the back seat as the person embraces a holistic worldview, integrates life's lessons, appreciates the grand design of things through inclusive activities, blah, 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 with a deeper connection of self and others. Women tend to develop more masculine features, deep, rough voices, mustaches. Men develop more feminine features. And then the crux of this third stage is a midlife crisis. So adults start to question the relevance of their career, relationships. They are those who cling to the principles and convictions to the point that they totally close their minds to suggestions. These people are intolerant adults we meet at work. As a result, the relationships suffer. Their goals are always frustrated. Some adults remain in their youth state because they still live in the shadows of their parents. Individuals with unresolved adolescent crises may be forced into professions they do not like. This can be the result of too much pressure from the family or just indecisiveness because they have not figured out what they want to do in the first place. These people feel that the time is running out and haven't even started pursuing their dreams. Midlife crisis is also characterized as a paranoia one feels towards aging because the present circumstance point to a bleak future. So I thought that was just really fitting to the fact that when you choose the Newman race, let's see if I can fit this up here. When you choose the Newman race, you are like automatically put into like this middle-aged age set, which I thought was really interesting. So in the opening cutscene, we see the major thing that we see is the death of Godwin, right? It's like this whole black night that these shadowy creatures kill him. And then from there, a war commences called the Shattering. And that process of Godwin's death is the first step of the magnum opus, or of individuation, called the Negredo, the blackness, the darkening, the death, all that kind of stuff. So that the fact that that is shown in a split second, and although it's definitely referred to in game, and like there's tons of narrative and contextual clues that we find, the actual moment that happens is very, very quick. So it's something that we have to keep in mind. But it means that, for one, Marika is definitely in the second half of her life. She's beginning this third stage of her life where the process of individuation is commencing. And that process starts with the death of something psychically that is like very comforting to her. So I'm going to quickly go through a few slides here that talk about, and all of these quotes and stuff are coming from this book, The Mysterium Lectures, and then also this book, The Anatomy of the Psyche, Alchemical Symbolism and Psychotherapy. So the first thing that I thought was just, it almost encapsulates like the overall plot of and story of the game is, quote, initially psychotherapy makes one aware of one's fragmented, disjointed condition. Very gradually, these warring fragments are discovered to be differing aspects of one's underlying unity. It is as though One sees the fingers of a hand touching the table at first only in two dimensions, as separate, unconnected fingers. With three-dimensional vision, the fingers are seen as part of a larger unity, the hand. Um, I thought that that quote like just fit so well with kind of like the major elements that we see in game. Um, we know that these great runes who are warring against each other, right? Like the Shattering is literally a war between these great runes trying to find dominance with one another. Um, are aspects of this underlying unity, which makes sense because we all of these great runes fit into the Shattered Elden Ring. So the Shattered Elden Ring, therefore, would be this underlining unity, the kind of whole collective psyche of America. Um, and then it's an interesting choice of words that they use as far as when you see in two dimensions, right, the two fingers, you see it as two very unconnected, um, like ideas of thought. Like it's right and wrong, it's black and white, it's good and evil. Um, but then when you see it in three dimensions, an element of gray is added into it, and you see it as a whole thing where it's like there, it's everything's kind of on a scale of unity, is on a slider of unity, and it's not just that or that. Um, so Anyways, Negredo. Negredo is the first of three or four stages of the magnum opus, depending on what century you're in. But it's split into two overlapping processes. So the first is mortificatio, which means death and killing, and then the second process of the Negredo is putreficatio, which means rotting. For today's purpose, since we only see Godwin die, um, as the beginning steps of the Negredo, we're just going to talk about that. So, and again, this is alchemy. Although it started as a very, it didn't even really start as that. I mean, it's a philosophical like science that connects the microcosm with the macrocosm. So the as much as it is like a material science of changing base stone into the philosopher's stone, so too it is it done in a psychological way where it's turning kind of your base self into a higher godlike image self. So um, today we're just going to be talking about how the process of Negredo, specifically mortificatio, is um, recognized psychologically. So mortificatio is the most negative operation, has to do with darkness and death associated with black in the shadow. But it usually leads to growth, resurrection, and rebirth. So one thing that we know is that a fragment of death was stolen in order to kill Godwin. Um, Death being the thing of Marika's shadow, right? Marika only has one thing in her Shadowbound Beast, and that is death. So the Negredo, Mortificatio, and the Shadow, there has to be an interplay between these two things. But usually, right, if it's a well-developed, what Carl Jung calls a conjunctio, which is a basically just a mixture of opposites. If it's a well-developed and mature conjunctio, it will lead into growth, resurrection, and rebirth. So who or what dies in this process? Basically, in all the alchemical symbols and stuff like that, it's usually the killing of a king, the sun, or a lion, the king of beasts. Excuse me. Um, which again, I thought lion and king of beasts was like everything is just so well tailored to Elden Ring. So all these three things, the king, the sun, lion, quote, refer to the ruling principle of the conscious ego and to the power instinct. At some point, these must be mortified, killed, in order for a new center to emerge. After a descent into hell, the ego, the king, is reborn phoenix-like in a purified state. Um, so basically, what this is saying is for development to occur, the the element that is standing in that way is the ego, because the ego is all about kind of keeping the status quo. It's all about keeping it in the spotlight. And if that never changes, then the self can never be reborn out of that ego. Um, Coagulatio comes first, and then mortificatio. So, what is coagulatio? Earth signifies coagulatio, alluding to the fact that mortificatio must follow coagulatio. The whole early process of individual psychic development, the ego emerging from its original state of oneness with the objective psyche, can be considered a process of coagulatio. So, the process of an ego forming out of the unconscious, right, of conscious ego development, is the process just before the killing of that ego. So basically, the ego gets nice and big and strong, right, and it literally becomes stone-like, right? It kind of solidifies. That's coagulatio is related to the element of earth, of stone. It becomes stone-like, and then from there, it dies. So it has to grow, mature, form before it can be killed. The alchemical operation of coagulatio constitutes an elaborate system that expresses the process of ego formation. So again, the ego the ego is forming into a very strong, healthy beacon of, the center of the psyche, and then once that happens, it undergoes this Negredo process, and this happens a lot, right? Like this process of the ego growing and forming, and then going back down again, back down to the prima materia, and then forming again, and then going back down. It happens over and over and over again until the mature ego, right, the full express of the ego, has occurred, and then from there, the next steps past Negredo can occur. But one thing that's really important about these processes, especially before Negredo, is that they can happen almost an infinite amount of times before the next stage happens. So everything needs to be in alignment. Everything needs to be at its like maturest full state in order for the true conjunctio to emerge. In order for like the true philosopher's stone to emerge. If underdeveloped, immature aspect of one of these processes occurs, then what's called a lesser conjunctio or a lesser philosopher's stone will occur. Talk more about that later. So far we're getting a good idea of, so before the death, the ego is formed, right? And this is kind of like the picture that we see in Malekith's bathroom, is the ego consciousness, right? The Elden Ring forming out of the roots of the unconscious. And then once that's nice and healthy and completely separate from one another, it needs to die and go back to be a more whole, united thing. So the next quote, the ego is offered up to the unconscious by a kind of voluntary death of one's psychic comfort, rightness, and rationality. One allows oneself to be less in order to be more whole. So that is basically saying that, just like what we talked about, the third stage of kind of loosening the ties and letting things just happen rather than trying to make things happen, becoming less in order to be more whole, is exactly what's happening here. So America's whole, up until we get in game, everything is pointing to a very specific, orderly way of life. But this is not suiting her anymore, and she is sacrificing the things that make her comfortable, right? That make her rational, that make her in order, so she can become more whole. Um, so just as Quagliaccio is formed sooner or later, or sorry, is followed sooner or later by mortificatio, so likewise does consummation of the lesser Ciontio lead to mortificatio. So this basically, so in the Rosarium images, the red king and the white queen, right? If those two individuals are not fully matured, right? If they are still in a state of immaturity and underdevelopment, this whenever they lead to consummation, right? Whenever they reunite, a negredo occurs, but it leads to a that's where it stops, right? Then it goes back. So what we see, and we'll talk about this more later, but this lesser Ciontio is called the monstrum, and the monstrum is like this. You see it in one of the Rosarium pictures. It's the winged kind of reptilian creature who is at the feet of the king and queen, and it's a lesser, immature, underdeveloped, basically end for the process of the Ciontio. So this is why we have to kill the Elden Beast, because it's a lesser Ciontio. It's not mature. It is it's just kind of the next stage that needs to happen. Which is also why I think when Merrick and Radigan joined, it was immediately followed by Mortificatio of Godwin, of the ego, because they are a lesser Ciontio as compared to, let's say, Melania and Mikola, right? They are the next stage of those two entities that will have an even more mature, more developed end. So then we go into basically the symbolism of the moon. So germination and decay, light changing to darkness, death and rebirth, all of these belong to the symbolism of the moon. The ego, by incarnating, by daring to exist at the center of being, right? This is the Quagliaccio stage, becomes subject to the corruption and death. The ego is eventually eclipsed, falls into the blackness of mortificatio, but from its death, the child of the philosopher's stone, is born. But the sun and moon die and transfer their power to their offspring. So, basically what we're seeing here is that the ego, Godwin, is eclipsed by the moon, Rani, right, and falls into the blackness of death. But from its death comes the child of the philosopher, aka the philosopher's stone. The philosopher's stone goes by a ton of different names, and one of those is like the son of the philosopher, which would be Mikola, right? Out of these two things dying, there is the so let me take a step back. So Radigan and America get together, right? This, because it's a lesser Ciontio, causes Godwin to die. And then from there, right, because of this lesser Ciontio, two more children are born, which is Mikola and Melania. And they, together, they are the child of the philosophers. So those two need to get together one more time in order for the full power of the philosopher's stone is to be realized. The birth of healing power from the Negredo belongs to the archetype of the wounded healer. So that is Mikola. So once Negredo happens, when that occurs, the archetype of the wounded healer basically is born, and that is Mikola. And then in this process, excuse me, in this process of Negredo, this descent to hell, this descent into darkness, there's this this phenomenon called multiple eyes, or oculi, oculi piscium, fish's eyes, which is death root. So the quote is, quote, "At this point, the multiple luminosities turn into multiple eyes like fish eyes. It is a major transition from the discovery of lights shining into darkness of the unconscious to the discovery of eyes looking at you from that darkness. The eyes indicate that the lapis, the self, the philosopher's stone, is in the process of evolution and grows from these ubiquitous eyes." So when we see the reason that Deathroot has eyes, right, that are kind of all over the lands between, is because the darkness is now looking back at the consciousness. The unconsciousness is looking back at the consciousness, and it is kind of the realm between these two things is starting to blend together, which is basically the end goal, right? This unity, this wholeness that is beginning to take place. So I think that gives us a pretty good idea of exactly what is happening within that split second of Ronnie. Now that we know later in game, Ronnie to the moon, right, to kill the ego, because that's like the domain of the moon. And then the ego, it descends into this darkness, and from this darkness, what comes back up from the darkness are these fish eyes, multiple eyes, that now are able to look back into the consciousness. And the reason that this happens is because the ego is the symbol and kind of the epicenter of everything that we are comfortable with. In order to loosen up the ties of our current way of thinking, and to start this process of individuation, we have to sacrifice what we are comfortable with. And we have to really take this deep dive into ourselves to uncover who we really are. Because we get to this middle age, and the things that we've worked so hard for and the things that we thought would work for us aren't really doing that anymore. And we need to reconnect with exactly who we are from the beginning. Antos, I really like how Negredo is the first step of alchemical pursuit. In Fair Missoula, the primordial land is depicted by the theme of death. Antos, can you help me out with what you're saying? How is Fair Missoula depicted by the theme of death or Godwin's curse? So, actually, we can very quickly make our way to some Deathroot to check it out. And obviously there's a ton more to it, right? Like, that was, what, 10 quotes or whatever, that I very quickly went over, but there's probably 100 pages dedicated to the Negredo process that, again, working on lore videos and stuff like that will eventually be very flushed out, but I like to get your guys' opinions of it and just kind of see what you all think, because I think it's hard to ignore.
Can you hear me? Help me. I'm stuck. Hello? Oh, my
Hello.
stars. I am Alexander, also known as the Iron Fist. And as you can see, I'm pleased. My thanks. 1,000 thanks. Just give me a good smack from the rear with something nice and big. And I'll pop clean out, I'm sure. Don't doubt me.
Um,
After all, I say.
Sorry, all sorts of sick. The the Negredo process is also called the Dark Night of the Soul, um, and
Well
the
played.
event that
Well
is
played.
referred to in game is the Night of the Black Knives, where like these shadowy figures who are riding funeral steeds go and kill Godwyn,
Well,
um, the symbol of the sun, the symbol of a king, like all these different things, who is clearly the
as a token of my
um,
appreciation, I'd like you to have this.
hey Nick, how's it going, man? Who is clearly the symbol of the ego, and
Once again,
what
I journey to the
happens is he falls to the base of the Erd tree,
rotten
right?
light
And this process of mortificatio and putreficatio is literally
combat is being held.
taking a hold of
Whispers of such festivity.
the Erd tree, which is the symbol of like America's consciousness, and definitely what the shadow of the Erd tree, right? The picture of the Erd tree is it's fully developed or enveloped in this
Heading to Redmayne.
um, in this death root. Sounds good, man. What's up, Cranky? So, as we talked about in part one, um, I kind of mentioned to just recognize whenever we see kind of odd things to see if they are near water, and what the water means as far as psychologically what it means. Uh, for example, we see Godwyn when he dies. He is like the first thing that happens is water pours from his eyes, um, and this is because he is descended into the realm of the unconscious, and the unconscious is always, always, always associated with things like the ocean and water and waterfalls and all this kind of stuff. So he descends immediately into the unconsciousness. So anytime that there's like this things around water or something involving water, it's correlated to the unconsciousness, which is why these mariners who can summon spirits and all that kind of stuff are always in a boat and always kind of around water. Um, is because the water is kind of the gateway between the conscious and unconscious. So that's like the medium that they have to use in order to pull spirits up from the underworld, more or less.
A tarnished are ye. I'm known as D. I hunt down those who live in death and weed their death root. Heed my warning. The village here has been touched by death, and worse yet, it is home to a mariner. If you value your life, then go no further.
And the the thematical narrative of the bifurcation between gold and silver, sun and the moon, consciousness, unconsciousness, and with the overwhelming kind of favor going in the way of the consciousness, right, of the ego, is displayed over and over and over again. And D, his armor, like, gives a very good description of exactly what is happening as far as like this total blindness and thwarting of the unconsciousness. But eventually, the unconsciousness will erupt, right? It will. You will pay the piper at some point.
The village here has been touched by death. Turn back while you still can.
Fair Missoula is deeply connected with Twinbird and the envoy of an outer god. Twinbird is represented by headless knights who protect those soulless demigods and waiting for Godwin's revival. So Twinbird is connected to those who live in death very deeply. Yep. Yeah, that's right, Nick. Very much like that. Yeah, I forgot about the Twinbird, Anto. Sorry, dude. And that's also where America's Shadow is at, right? America's Shadow lives in Fair Missoula, because that's kind of where she was born. The game over and over and over again talks about how there was this thing referred to as the One Great, and then from it came births and fractures and all that kind of stuff. The same thing happens with consciousness. It is, in the beginning, we're in this state of unconsciousness, right? And everything is kind of interwoven together. It's just a root system of total chaos, where there is no fractures and no divisions and no splits. And then from that, what's born out of that is the ego consciousness. And from that, because ego is a very divisive kind of element of us, from that comes fractures and all that type of shit. So as soon as America developed an ego, the law of thermodynamics, that when something takes place, an equal and opposite reaction will take place. So when she creates an ego, at the same time, right, which is the statue that we see, the same time she creates a shadow. And that shadow, Malekith, is also there. Like, all of these things take place there, in her childhood. What do you have to say? Oh, you're just gonna pop through a fence, eh?
I'm searching for my purpose, given to me by my mother inside the Earth Tree.
So remember,
Long ago,
inside the Earth Tree, right? She's inside the consciousness. She's inside the psyche of America.
I must apologize.
Her mother is America, right? Because America is the subject, and she's searching for what she's supposed to be doing. She can't really, right? Her purpose was long ago lost, and in that axis, our ego self axis, where the ego and the self are one, and then we see it start to separate until they are completely unseparated, or till they're completely separated. And the self has no interaction with the ego anymore, right? That ego has become coagulated. It's finished the process of the coagulatio, which now means that the very next step that has to occur is mortificatio, is the death of that ego. And from the death of that ego reappears the self. The self is then again finding its way back to that ego, right, in order to reassimilate with it and to reunite with all the different aspects of the psyche. So Melina saying that she doesn't know who she is, that she doesn't remember, what she was supposed to be doing, and that she's burned and bodiless, and that she can't remember what her mother inside the Erd Tree told her to do, is very much what the self would be personified as in this stage of life. when you have completely fallen out of touch with who you really are. Antos says, um, Fair Missoula being the primordial land is a thematic connection to Negredo on a macro scale. Then comes America's reign, Albedo, second step in alchemical stage. Then Citronitius, Michaela's birth in the beginning of unalloyed gold, and finally Rubedo, which we'll see hopefully in DLC. What do you think? Rubedo being Michaela, finally maturation period, 2 red unalloyed gold. So I do see Fair Missoula as Fair Missoula, and if you're familiar with the Rosarium pictures, the first one is also the first and last stage. So it's kind of actually ironic that Melina is here. So Melina, the reason that she's burned and bodiless is because this has happened a ton of different times. Like I said earlier, this process that leads to the final Quiuntio, to this final fully mature stage of the Philosopher's Stone, to the final stage of the Self. It takes many times, many cycles of this process. So when we light the Forge of the Giants and then are back into Fair Missoula, that picture that we're seeing of another ego coagulating out of and distilling out of the unconscious is what we are doing, right? Basically, the next order, right, whichever ending that we choose, is the next ego to be developed. If that makes any sense. So there still is one more stage to go through. So our stage, our ending, it doesn't really matter what it is, because that will again go under Negredo until the final stage where that doesn't happen again, where this collapse and rebounding doesn't happen again. So that's how I see Fair Missoula. Is this the beginning and the end of kind of this process? And I think although Mikola is incredibly important, he has to unite with Melania, and that didn't happen because we killed Melania. So to me, that means that there's one more time that this process needs to happen, right? For Mikola to be fully matured and to be this, the son of the philosopher, the lapis, the self, this wounded healer, all this kind of stuff. And then Rubedo is actually, although it's red, the reason that it's red is because it's associated with blood. So blood gives things life. So this new wholer self is born, and under Rubedo, it's given the life essence of blood, which is kind of what like Moog was doing, right? Was giving. So Mikola was doing it himself, right? He was giving the Halig tree his own blood, right? He was kind of going through this process of Rubedo before Moog stole him and stopped that process, and then Moog's corrupted blood basically, I think, ended Mikola's Halig tree process. So I think that this process needs to happen one more time. And I think the twin bird is the ego and the shadow. The shadow being everything related to death, which is why it's in Fair Missoula, because that's where all of that shit took place. That probably sounds like ramblings of a madman, but So there you can see. Here, let me. Oh, what? So all this death root here, right, surrounded by the water, um, and the mariner being obviously water being kind of the medium that she uses as not only how she casts up these spirits, but also just whacking a bitch. Ow! But also how she kind of damages us is because all of these things are coming from the unconscious. Oh shit. Hey, Caleb. Yeah, no worries, man. Appreciate you stopping by and saying hi. Hope you have a good day, dude. I've never understood why D is like so terrified of these mariners. They're literally like the easiest enemies in the game. He's a little bitch. He's a little bitch. Yeah, no worries, man. Yeah, sounds good. Um, so those fish eyes, right? The once the ego descends into hell, into this darkness, and then from that something else comes back up, um, and are the eyes of the unconscious that are looking into the consciousness, um, which signifies these two worlds starting to merge, right? And the process of individuation growing and maturing, um, is seen here, right? I've never ever understood why there's eyes and scales and all this type of stuff on Deathroot, but it makes a lot of sense when I kind of read that. Nick asks, "Isn't the Crucible more about reddish gold because it still contains destined death? Unallied gold seems to be more about removing the flaws in the Golden Order." Yeah, I agree. I think like the hair of Melania, or sorry, not Melania, of Melina, is kind of like the Crucible color, right? It's gold and red, um, put together, which is Radigan and America's hair. And separating things out, right, into opposites, is kind of the what the ego is supposed to do. Um, but from an alchemical standpoint, the reason that uh, it's like the reason that you can have either 3 or 4 operations is because the third and fourth one can be combined into just one operation, and that one operation is usually called like red gold, um, because it is the combination of the yellowing and the reddening. It's kind of like the the gold is given the life giving essence of blood. Um, And then also, again, notice that Trina's lilies are almost always found in and around water. Yet again, connecting Saint Trina with the unconscious realm, with like the dream world, with all this different um, synonyms for the unconscious. Where the hell? Where am I at? Where you at, D? I'm all sorts turned around right now. Oh, I'm back here. Okay.
Another fool who won't listen to reason, eh? But with a prowess for weeding Deathroot. How would you like to earn the strength of beasts? If you're inclined to hunt more of those who live in death and
Mm.
weed their Deathroot, then I'll introduce you to Gurranq, the beast clergyman. I have a matter of my own to attend. The beast himself wishes for someone to take my place. What say you? Very well. Show me your
Auto Sass. See what you mean. What do you think of the non-dual integration of Saint Trina, purple and Mikola yellow, creating
hidden gateway.
dark red brown,
Lead you to
red
Gurranq.
tint of unalloyed gold, like Ordivis's sword. Um, since Mikola and Trina are the same in essence, I think that might be how the redness of unalloyed gold will arise, not necessarily by merging with Melania. Oh, that could be interesting. Melania will be reborn. um, yeah, it definitely could be. Um, One thing that I've never had a clear answer of is if Mikola and Saint Trina are the same person. Um, like they certainly have to be, right? Um, Another kind of interesting part of the magnum opus is it all has to do with uh, in alchemy anyways, it has to do with recombining the soul, the spirit, and the body back together. Um, and those three things, almost every single set of children that America has with in each stage of development is three children. Um, and I have yet to kind of figure out they are supposed to be, if they're supposed to be, symbols of. Go away. Ooh, it could have been bad. Oh shit. Gotcha. They are one and the same. Yeah, I agree with Nick. I think It's just the it's kind of like the color of unity, right? However you want to think about it.
Forgive me. I've been testing you to determine if the Elden Ring would truly have you, if you had the mettle to endure this long and arduous path.
Look at me. You don't think I can do this?
My worries were unfounded. Torrent had your measure from the very start, whereas I merely pretended. There is but one other thing I can do to offer you guidance. I can take you to the Round Table Hall, gathering place of tarnished champions, guided by grace.
Nick, I think there's some cut content about like them being the same person. Now, whether you can,
Well, let my hand rest upon you.
it's hard to accept content because you don't know why it was cut. Um, it could be cut because it no longer follows with like the narrative they're trying to say, but it also could just be cut because they're trying to make it more uh, obscure. So it's it's hard to say. I actually found I think what explains the round table hold really really well. Um, and I will for next time I'll make it into a slide so that way we can talk about it. But again, it's in this book about um, the Mysterium lectures, which is about the alchemical process. Let's see here. Um, it's called the the Ecclesia Spiritualis. Jung presents some text indicating that the spirit Mercurius and individuals who have and the individuals who have made a living connection with the spirit make up the Ecclesial Spiritualis. This is a spiritual church, not a concrete external collective church. It is a psychological spiritual church that unites individuals who have had their own deep experience with the autonomous spirit Mercurius. Um, there's more to it than that, but if you guys are interested, check out the Ecclesia Spiritualis and look into it yourself. Basically, what it's saying is that it's saying that if you've had contact with Queen America, right, Mercurius, um, and you've had kind of a profound experience with her, you are part of this group of people psychologically as like this spiritual church where you're all connected because of this similar connection you have with America. Um,
You're a new face. No matter. It's all the same. Lay out your arms. Let's get sniffing.
I'll again I'll do a little bit more digging and make it a little more
I see you've noticed a change.
thorough than that, but it's definitely worth looking
I'm
into.
a prisoner and these are my chains. I'm trapped by the hold. I'm dying, smithing for you fools. That's all there is to it.
One was the 12 churches, and the other was the tarnished. What do you mean, Cranky? Is that connected to Mikola? Two personas somehow. Um, yeah, yeah, I'm excited for the DLC. I think it's gonna be pretty sweet. It's definitely going to be, my guess is that everything that is occurring is specifically at night is going to be like the main world of the Shadow of the Erd Tree. So funeral steeds and the Black Knights and Deathbirds, all that kind of stuff, I think is going to be the majority.
Read too
Like
much into it.
that type of enemy will be the majority of enemies that we
My
face.
being a prisoner is no fault of yours. Besides, I don't mind smithing. Despite my differences, the weapons get stronger all the same. With time, technique never fails. Besides, it helps me
Yeah.
forget the sheer terror of her.
So notice. Okay, so let's talk about him for just a second. Hugh. So he he is clearly from the Crucible era, right? He's a misbegotten where all of these things were blended together, which means that America and her shadow are still united. Um, she and the Glowmite Queen are still one and the same person. So the personality traits that go with those two characters are accessible to one individual. So him saying that he's terrified of the sheer terror of her, although it's America, he's talking about the qualities that make up the Glowmite Queen because she is yet to be separated from America because this is where he comes from. He dwells in this soup of where everything is still blended together. But then he also talks about Queen America um, because she is that person, right? She just also is able to access that more darker side of herself while still in the Crucible era because divisions and fractures have yet to occur. Um, what do you think on the Saint Trina of having Third Eye open on that torch? Yeah. Yep. Um, so Third Eye open is also like it's analogous to basically everything that we're talking about here as far as like the process of individuation and the alchemical processes that make it up. The third eye is basically that you're just more aware, right? Like you this awakening process where you're aware of your conscious and your unconscious. And like I alluded to in my Elden Lord video is that the fourth and final stage of that person is the mediator between the conscious and unconscious. So the Saint Trina Mikola character um, is gonna be that fourth and final version where they are the ones mediating. They're kind of the gatekeepers and allowing America to access these different things. Um, that's kind of how I take that. Um, 12 churches and Gnosticism, simply 12 apostles, Sophia's journey, but also simply known as 12 steps of the hero's journey. Interesting. Um, Trina Mikola. Yeah, that's not cut content, but the cut content I think is like where it like directly ties them as being the same person, if I remember. The torch you can find. Uh oh. My son just woke up, so that might be all that I got today. Um, hey, Bubba. How are you?
Good.
You good?
Uh-huh.
Well, I'm probably gonna have to go, guys. That's kind of the life I'm living right now. So I'd be interested in streaming again tonight if you guys would be up for that. Maybe around like 8 p.m. Central, something like that. That's something you got, and we can continue this conversation. And I'll dig up some more stuff on that spiritual church that I think kind of represents the Round Table Hold. But if you're interested in that, just either comment in the chat or comment in the video below. But yeah, I think today, I pretty much covered what I wanted to cover. The first stage of kind of this individuation and alchemical process of Negredo. Now, we only talked about part one, the first process in this Negredo, which is mortificatio, which is literally just the killing and the things that deal with that. But later we'll talk about the second process, the putreficatio, which is about rotting, which basically is what millennia is all about, and what that means with regards to psychology. So, anyways, guys, sorry this one was short. I tried to sneak it in there while he was napping, but that's kind of the way it goes. But anyways, thank you all so much for the support. If you wouldn't mind, giving this video a like, and then comment below if you're interested in hopping back on later tonight, and we can continue this conversation. And if not, then we'll just we'll do it kind of on whenever I can next time. But anyways, guys, much love. Appreciate you all.